I'm Lara Land, somatic coach and yoga teacher trainer, and this is the Beyond Trauma podcast. What a couple of years we have had. The challenges continue to grow, and more of us are experiencing some level of traumatic stress. My commitment here is to bring you the most up-to-date insights on exactly how trauma affects our mind, body, spirit system, and how we can work with our bodies to soften its impacts. You will be hearing from trauma survivors and researchers, and together, we are going to incorporate what they have to teach us to heal ourselves and promote the well-being of all those around us. Here we go. I am so excited to share that my book, The Essential Guide to Trauma-Sensitive Yoga, comes out this spring. This is the book for every yoga teacher, studio, and practitioner who wants to incorporate an inclusive approach to yoga. It is available for purchase on my website, laraland.us, and everywhere books are sold. If you're loving this podcast, you are going to love this book. Hello, everyone. I am back. Okay, we weren't on a break, but I kind of was. I tend to record these like a bunch at once, and then I need some time to research and think about what I'm interested in, what you might be interested in, and make sure that I'm bringing you the absolute best guests and topics. And I am really with this one. This is a very exciting episode. But before we get to that, I want to just share a couple things that are coming up as we get closer and closer to the release date of my book, The Essential Guide to Trauma-Sensitive Yoga. You want to keep some things on your radar because I'm going to be jam-packing my schedule with workshops, trauma-informed yoga trainings, and some talks and offerings. And I really want to see you there. If you haven't pre-ordered the book, make sure you get on the pre-order because there are 3 bonuses that I'm offering. A body scan recording, trauma-informed. Body scan is one of my favorite practices. It is my go-to for closing out a trauma-informed yoga class. I do my own body scans all the time. And 2 beautiful, when I say beautiful, yoga sequences, trauma-informed yoga sequences that we photographed that didn't make the actual book. There are, I think, 4 sequences in the book. These are 2 more. They might be my favorites. They're very, very special. And you're going to get them when you pre-order the book. You'll get these 2 extra yoga sequences. One is a restorative in nature. The other one is a chair yoga sequence. They're both really focused in self-love and self-acceptance. And finally, there's going to be a special Q&A with me for folks who pre-order, an online Q&A. So make sure you pre-order the book. And also some things coming up this March, right before the book launches and everything is about that. I wanted to fit in one more special retreat. I've been leading these 3-day retreats up here in the Catskill Mountains. This one will be on March 24th through 26th. It's on the theme of reemergence, coming out of winter, how to springboard your cleansing, your reemergence into the world, get the fire going again after very necessary kind of winter feelings that we go through, a little bit of hibernation, a little bit of, really maybe indulging, being in comfort. And coming into spring, we just want to get that fire going again, get some movement and breath going and some heat in the body. It's going to be a beautiful 3-day retreat. You can speak to anyone who's been on retreat with me. I can promise you 3 days and a transformation. There will be a transformation. We do it fast and furious. So look into that. And then you're going to want to stay tuned for book launch events, both in person and online. Probably May 2nd, publication date. We will have something here in Andes, New York, Catskills. May 13th, my birthday, back in New York City. May 15th, I have something very special planned for you, an online panel around person-centered, trauma-sensitive Ashtanga. So this is really one for the Ashtanga community with a bunch of special guests I will announce soon. Plus, very, very, very exciting, meet me in Miami for my first time at Miami Life Center, August 18th through 20th for a trauma-informed yoga teacher training. I am so excited to bring this training to Miami and to my friends, Kino and Tim's Yogashala. Great excuse to be there. So take a look at my site, laraland.us, and you can link up to all those great offerings and more to come. So today's episode, Rachel Aiden is a prosocial entrepreneur. She has 20 plus years of experience working on projects across the US, East Africa, and Europe. And currently, she's the CEO at Synthesis Institute, a legal psilocybin retreat and practitioner training center with locations in Amsterdam and Oregon. Rachel holds a BA in Transformative Education and Leadership, an MA in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. That's what I'm getting my MA in. And Trauma-Informed Leadership. And she is completing her Ph.D. in Integral Transpersonal Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where her research focuses on psilocybin-assisted treatment for PTSD and Complex Trauma. So she is in it. I mean, in some ways, I think we're just scratching the surface here for people who are a little bit curious about psychedelics, which I am. I just wanted to ask some kind of basic questions and connect the dots between psychedelics and trauma healing. And as she says in this interview, she's still, at the beginning of a lot of that research. So there's going to be a lot more coming out on psychedelics and healing trauma. We're going to talk about in this conversation what safe practice, right, of journeying looks like and what you can expect if you decide to go on a journey. This conversation is very exciting to me, and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. There we go. Hi, Rachel. Thanks again for making time out of your busy schedule to be here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
It's really nice to have you. I'm very excited about this. I don't know how much time you got to look into the podcast, but the main focus here is trauma. And we've been talking a lot about embodied practices that can help to soften the impacts of trauma. We've also had quite a number of survivors of traumatic events come and talk about their experiences and what has worked for them. And I really want to get into some other practices and solutions for dealing with different kinds of traumas. And the use of plant medicine is becoming more and more popular, and it never really went away, I don't think. But
Mhm.
a lot of people are turning to plant medicine. And so I'm very curious about this field and very, very excited to ask you all my personal questions, because I guess there's still like a lot of mystery and maybe some taboo around plant medicine. Before we get to all of that, I thought maybe you could share just your history, your background. I know you have a background in some trauma leadership, and maybe you can just share like how you ended up being the CEO of Synthesis.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of questions. I'm excited to talk about psychedelics, especially in relationship to integrating and healing trauma. Yeah, so my background, as you said, I personally lived through what we now know diagnostically as complex trauma, which is different than single event. And single event can be just as traumatizing, of course. But complex trauma indicates often many years. For many folks, it might be an entire childhood into young adulthood. And it's many layers of abuse. If you're familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences survey, they list, it's sexual, physical, emotional, parent in prison, refugee, and war displacements on that list. And so my childhood was filled with sexual, emotional, physical abuse, and there's more to that we'll get into if we need to. But to kind of fast forward to finding my way to psychedelics and then later to synthesis, it was, as you say, somebody that was on a path of healing. And if I fast forward to how did I join synthesis, it was about 2017. My youngest sibling committed suicide. As one of four children, I'd already lost my other two siblings. And this is really devastating. And like most of us had integrated and done a lot of healing. And so for that to happen so many years later, it really was devastating, of course. And it was really through that period that I realized that what I wanted to be doing was building the kind of spaces that don't quite yet exist. I share a piece of processing my brother. His name was Tavis, his passing, and there was this excruciating kind of pain of like, there's no emergency room to go to with this kind of pain, especially when you think you've healed, you think you've integrated. And, we know that when we're kind of re traumatized, all the unprocessed or unintegrated trauma kind of comes back up with it. So, it gave me a lot to look at. And in that process of what kind of places and spaces do we really have to go that meets us in the cognitive and the spiritual and the emotional and the body and really meets us on all the levels on which we were harmed or traumatized. That was kind of the final push and inspiration to go and say, what's out here? What's out here in the world in a legal context where we can go and use psychedelic assisted kind of approaches. After some Googling, there's many retreats, right? This isn't new, as you just said before. There's many retreats, but I was really looking for something that wasn't Central South America. It was, more of a kind of a medically supervised, definitely legal kind of space. And that's how I found Synthesis. And when I found them, they had just opened. They're about a month or two into just kicking off retreats. And so I went out there to participate in the retreat and see what was they're about. And I fell in love with the whole team, just really saw these beautiful hearts of gold and so appreciated, our namesake Synthesis. It gives us room to really say there's many ways of knowing and bringing together the things we know. There's no one right way. And, that's exactly my philosophy. I went back to the US and then I came back to Amsterdam very shortly thereafter. And I approached the founders, just said, I love what you're doing and I'd really love to join you. And probably about a month later, I joined our organization as our COO. And so, yeah, that's kind of the origin story of coming to Synthesis.
Wow. Yeah. And was that your first experience? With synthesis, it's not actually mushrooms, right? It's truffles. Or is that the same? Can you maybe explain?
Yeah, yeah. So in the Netherlands, the truffles containing psilocybin are legal for adults to purchase. And in the US, what we see coming online in the new legal regulatory frameworks is actually mushrooms. So it's psilocybin, but it's in a different form.
Yeah. And maybe you can explain even more about sort of what drew you to psilocybin as opposed to maybe other drugs that people are using these days. Like there's a big trend of ayahuasca. Is there something specific about mushrooms that are different?
So yeah, it was not my first time. I've been working with psychedelics for a very long time, and the range is between iboga, psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA. And so, they each have a distinct flavor, if you will, of what channels they open up, or there's a different space with each of these medicines or compounds. This goes back a long time, and it's exciting because where we're at right now, I never thought I would see a legal regulatory framework in the United States in my entire life.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's beautiful. But psilocybin, it's definitely what we say. It's my medicine. It's the go to really in the trauma work. MDMA is also phenomenal, and that is coming online, as I'm sure you're aware as well. And so when I talk about this stuff, I often say, like, people ask about how do you know what to take or which one. And I think it's really important that what we actually start with and the way we work at Synthesis is before you get there is making sure you're being screened, health screening, is kind of a step one. You might be ready physiologically to take a psychedelic, but in fact, there's a lot more to preparation than just not having any contraindications.
Hmm.
And so when you go through health screening and then you move into preparation, there's some facilitators that might work with multiple modalities or psychedelics. You might know you're ready for psilocybin, but in the preparation process, it's about understanding your intention, what it is you're up to, what you want to work on. And at that time, a facilitator, professional experienced facilitator would really be able to guide you. Is psilocybin really the best tool?
Mm.
And beyond the medicine, dosing. A
Yeah.
lot of people, there's a lot around that, microdosing, high dosing, a lot of confusion around dosing. So it's
Hmm.
it's really important to kind of, as we get into it, I think a public service announcement is first, we always need to start with safety,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking to trauma populations. Many of us, we've tried everything, and it's just, you want the magic pill,
Mm.
literally. And this is not that. There isn't one. And so it's really important to start with, as we're talking to these audience, health screening always has to come first. And having a professional you work with that takes you through a preparation process where you really dive deep into the material and talk about what the journey is going to be like as you go into an actual experience. And then the final piece I would say to this is making sure you've got integration support,
Yeah.
right? So that's another really big piece, because you can go and have these profound breakthroughs, and if you don't have support at home, if no one knows what you're doing, if you're going to return back to isolation, or worse, potentially an actively traumatic kind of life, it's really about safety. And so I
Mm.
just want to stress these components as we navigate this conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'd actually like to go through all three of those phases and maybe dissect them a little further.
Sure.
Like, what are some questions coming up for me are what would be the counterindications? What are they screening for? Yeah. Are there certain kinds of traumatic experience that this might not be the right match for? And as you mentioned, that's so important. Like some folks may be going back to unsafe environment.
Well, so we can hone in here really on those in fact affected by trauma. So I'm going to kind of put aside talking about this language of healthy normals or folks that do not have a diagnosis,
Hmm.
really talk to this audience. So, starting with trauma, I mean, the first piece is, as you enter any kind of work, not just psychedelics, is we have to get to stability. We're working with a client, we're working with a client. What is life looking like right now? If they're in an actively abusive or trauma state, we're definitely not ready to go right into psychedelics. And so that's one of the first things when going to screening is, are you safe? Are you stable? What's home life look like? What kind of supports do you have? When we get into screening, the fact is we are still in such a new place with psychedelics and their application to those experiencing PTSD. There's the most research in that particular focus, as you know, the veteran care, but it's still pretty narrow. I mean, we recognize, right, like 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused worldwide, right? And that's a different flavor than wartime trauma. It is all
Mm.
trauma. But when we're screening, it's synthesis, we're looking at evidence backed data. And so for that, we just don't have a lot of data. And so if someone were to apply at this moment where we've gotten to, we really have to take it case by case because there isn't a cookie cutter solution here. So some of the things are screening that pertain to all bodies, has to do with the medications you're taking, looking at psychological health, suicide ideation, or any attempts, any psychosis or hospitalizations, looking at comorbid factors. You might be on a medication, but, maybe a heart condition or something else that together those are dangerous, right? So it's
Mm.
not necessarily the trauma that's coming up there. And looking at, like I said, the home life, do you have a therapist or someone that is therapeutically there to support you, that you're not going to be isolated. You're going to have somebody to integrate this process with. The screening and the more specifically, the programming for trauma folks and CPTSD, it's really in development. And it's something I'm very keen and excited to see us develop really specifically as we open up here in the US this year ahead. So it's to say, there are no we have it all figured out, and this is how you screen for trauma, and this is it,
Mm.
the field is still young and learning in that way, despite the fact that so many are traumatized as they come into it. It's what kind of degree, and that these tools, especially the plants, thousands of years of history of absolutely working with healing. So it's a funny time of science and academia catching up to validate, with
Yes.
safety and then balancing that deep wisdom. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just laughing 'cause I'm thinking about yoga and, like, when I started 25 years ago, and now there's countless studies on yoga for everything.
Right.
And it's like we knew it. We could feel it,
Exactly.
but it's so
Yeah.
funny to think of science as always, like, catching up to our lived experience. Um,
Yes. Yes, it's
yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, so then maybe you can take us into what the experience would be like. Folks are taking the drugs along with other people, right?
Yeah. So the retreat experience in the Netherlands, we work in a group model. That's what you're pointing to there. And we work with 16 as a maximum, 2-to-1 ratio as far as having facilitators and a lot of protocol in place for our participants. So once they've completed preparation, which is about 3 sessions prior to the retreat, and you do that with the group, and there's definitely time and space that we need to do our more private healing in a smaller container. But there's also this kind of you can't heal yourself by yourself. Yeah, there's a lot of deep connection and healing that comes from being with a group. And those preparation calls, you meet that group and you really start the journey there as a group. So by the time you're coming to retreat, you've had a few hours building that container and that connection. And then you come to a 5-day retreat that's in Amsterdam. And on day one, it's really about landing, getting the body, some rest, good food, just building the connection. And we have just various workshops throughout the week. And so day one's about kind of landing and acclimating. And on day two, we start our day with breath work, and it's a kind of a quieter day. And then we have kind of midday to the rest of that day, we do the first ceremony or psilocybin session, depending on the language that resonates. But nonetheless, that's the day one ceremony. That's typically a lower dose kind of day. And then the next day, day three, is again, it's about integration. So we're always looking at social, emotional, spiritual, and cognitive kind of integrations. And we do that work both one to one. So if you're on retreat, you have somebody that's your point person, your one to one, and you also have your group. So the day post ceremony one is that mix of working with your one to one and your group and also having downtime to rest. Day four, we do a second ceremony and we have breath work kind of moving throughout our program. It's more of an embodiment piece to keep coming back into the body.
Can I ask what kind of breath work you're using?
It's really a combination of, it is not so invigorating as Stan Grof's kind of work. It's really pulled from my background is in one called body breath meditation. We have other team members that came from, I think, transformative breath, others in holotropic. And so, true to our name is synthesis, it's like taking kind of what is the best pieces we've all experienced, especially as they
Mm.
intersect with psychedelics and really making our own program.
Are you doing the breathing while you're on the psychedelics, or
No,
is it
we that's a
before?
preparation piece. We do
Okay.
a proper breath work. And so really breath work is kind of like I say, like ground control. And when you really have a good practice, which doesn't mean you have to belabor it in years, it's simple. It can be 3 deep breaths. It can be very
Mhm.
little things. It's ways that we're helping the person have some tools to stay very grounded in their body.
Mm.
And that agency is so important when journeying, to feel safe that you've
Mm.
got this.
Yeah.
So, sometimes you might be working with someone and you can see they might just need a little bit of comforting and you don't need to go touch, you don't need to go intervene. It's not about you as a facilitator. Often you can just sit next to someone and you just
Mm.
and they hear you
Yeah.
and they remember and they
Mm.
breathe.
Yeah.
Very gentle. That's kind of how we work with breath work. And so, yeah, day four is another ceremony. Often the option is to do a higher dose. So it's a similar process. And then the final day, again, is about integrations and really making sure then that transition to going home, traveling, just ensuring they have access to any emergency kind of services in the psychedelic space, like Fireside or, there's many. And then also kind of preparing the group to transition into the integration piece that we do after retreat, which is again 3 consecutive sessions together as a group after
Mm.
we complete retreat.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the experience. When after the ceremony and once folks have taken their dosage of the psychedelics, are they wearing eye shades?
That's an option. There's a lot of different tools. If you want to sit up, you want to lie down, do you want your eyes closed? Do you want your eyes open? Do you want headphones? Do you want to listen to the
Mm.
music? These are really all tools that this is about educating people so they understand how to get to the comfort levels they might need.
Mm.
And so I invite folks, especially when they're new, to lie down, to have eye shades on. That's the setup we tend to start with. Is it's really kind of a high rest yoga nidra vibe, if you will, right? Of really relaxing. But sometimes you have to remember with trauma, people lying down and putting an eye shade on your strangers is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
This work requires deep trauma informed, which, if we say simply, it's always really listening and creating a lot of optionality and
Yes.
ensuring that the client is guiding the process and not the other way around.
That's what I really liked about synthesis when I was reading about you, that it was very person centered.
Mm.
And that's trauma informed, right? It's giving the individual a lot of options to discover what feels right for them.
That's exactly it. I was just talking to someone the other day. It's like a thing I often find myself saying is this work in particular, and it could apply to everything. I'm not excluding, but with trauma and complex trauma, the goal, no matter what modality, I don't think this is just so specific to psychedelics. Our goal is to be like a flashlight on the path. That's how I see it. We walk alongside each other and we need to help illuminate all there is to look at inside of ourselves. But the client needs to say, "Hey, I want to look over there. I want to look
Mhm.
over there." Not, "Hey, oh, you have that thing and I think we need to do it. And here's what we got to do breath work and we're going to get into yoga and then we're going to, this that's not the way." And so
Mhm.
yeah, it really is important that, because we're so susceptible to further trauma when we're seeking healing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's really important to notice that. Do you have somebody that's helping you see? Just look into yourself and look at all the things you might want to explore. And then you need to decide that. And we just walk with you.
How do people I'm wondering, how do people reconcile the kind of loss of control that occurs? I mean, I know it seems like it's both the medicine and the the danger is like that loss of control is so important to the process, but also so scary.
Well, the interesting, I mean, the last thing is that's a big question. We probably could talk the rest of the time there.
I'm just asking for, myself.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's really important to imagine other people. That's one of the scariest things, and it's unknown. And so we want to remember what might seem like a loss of control might not be a loss of control. And so, this piece of having really deep rapport with your facilitator so that you can let go,
Hmm.
be open. It's not about the taking control or things, but it's a real fear. Many people I know that want to try it, they say, "I'm so scared. I'm not going to have any control." And I go, "Yeah, that's part of this." And knowing that you are in control,
Hmm.
but it's a delicate hand here.
And how does the group dynamic also play into that? I imagine if you're all in a shared space,
Mhm.
you're hearing other people, and if someone is having a difficult experience, that might affect you.
Yeah, it's actually, this can go both ways. I think the experiences we've had at Synthesis and that I've had in other groups. So first of all, we talk about this in preparation. What are you going to do, Laura, if you need to laugh and you hear me crying?
Mm.
Yeah, because we have these ways we're kind of wired to like, oh, I need to restrain my emotions because they're not lining up with the other emotion in the room. And it's beautiful. Many times I've heard guests talk about how much it meant to them to hear someone else in their state, whether it was in laughter and joy or grieving. And no matter where they were, there's that unitive consciousness piece is like the full spectrum of humanity is alive in the room. And
Mm,
it often conjures up deep compassion. And that compassion that one feels for the other in the room is often magnified into themselves.
mm,
And it's also a beautiful opportunity. There's times, certainly, if someone needs space, we always have adjacent space in our facilities that we don't completely go away from the group, but we have just a little bit of, we might say, hey, Laura, do you need to get up? Do we need to go grab some air and come over here? Yes. And you might get up and then we try to get you to come back to the group
mm.
if that's safe for you. So there's also making sure it's not like, no, you will lay there and you will, not at all. And there's other times too, yeah, it's really agitating for someone, but even in those moments, that agitation is beautiful and it is welcome because why would we be angry with one another when we hear tears or we hear joy? So I feel like that it's just this rich field of data and it's how do we hold it and translate it
Mm,
to open ourselves and deepen connection.
that's really beautiful. I wonder what we talked about before and now a little bit during. What are some of the results of coming through an experience like this?
Yeah, the kind of touch wood that, at synthesis, we've been, incident free and not without challenging experiences. I could drop into tears when I really plug into what I've witnessed and when I hear the retreat team share at different moments. It's stunning, Laura. You see it in someone's eyes
Mm,
when post journey, you can feel it in them. There's this openness. It's so stunning to watch the way people come in and then when they go home. Really, there's a range of trying to kind of see different ways I can share. I mean, it's just, specific to traumas, again, when it comes to our screening, we're very stringent. And so, because that's for the client's safety and the safety of our team, there's times that maybe that information, it might not even been known to the client, right? There's material that might come up or details of it that might come up.
mhm,
So there's just ways that you see someone come through. And I guess what touches me most is a self-love. Even when it's painful, there's this way it's like, oh, I don't have to hold it like that. I don't have to hold it at all.
mm,
And there's a spaciousness, there's a freedom, there's a lightness, there's a tenderness. There's just this that we know, and we all get it. It's a deep, raw human place where you're like, really, you slow down and you really see people in front of you. So it's all these words I'm kind of throwing out rather than telling any one story. It's that openness. And I think, if you look at psilocybin and you even look at research in psilocybin, mystical experiences, unit of consciousness, this deep connection, it's palpable, Laura. It's how you see it, you feel it. It's in the room, the openness, and it's love. It's self
mm,
love. And so I don't, I want to be cautious not to paint, that picture a lot of people hear like, oh, you take it and you're like open and it's all better. It is open. And we know a lot about neuroplasticity and things in the realm of science. This is a very beneficial time for making change. And also, especially for those with trauma, it's so important to hear that more than likely you will go back to this state. There's that work on the other side. I love the example of, let's say, when you're journeying, you go to the top of the mountain, right? You're at the bottom and you go to the top. You're like, it's beautiful up here. I can see it all. I can see the ridges and I can see the journey I've been on and the rough terrain and the rocks. And oh my God, I can see it. I can see it. Then you come back down to the bottom of the mountain and now you know something, but now you actually have to do the work of climbing that mountain.
mm,
And that is really important to know ahead of time because some people go, oh my God, it came back. I'm still depressed. I'm still, yes, of course. The mushroom isn't magic. It's like getting to really see into a landscape in a way that is an embodied way. It's not just in the head. But then, that's why, underscore integration
mm.
is the real journey after we do the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that the everything that you have around the journey is very important, and I imagine that there's something about the combination of the psychedelic, the talk therapy, and the embodiment that together is really healing.
As a researcher, what I'm looking at is the kind of thesis, I suppose, is that trauma occurs on many levels. I think more than we understand. And so too must healing.
Mm.
So when we look at cognitive behavior therapy, traditional therapy alone, that's only cognition. Yeah. If we look at somatics, embodiment, that's the body. We look at spiritual practice, that might be spirit, the body, food, right? There's the emotional piece, that's emotions. And so there's so many layers here. And that's the work we're up to, is synthesizing or, looking at the many ways of knowing that we each know
Yeah.
and then meeting it there. So psychedelics open up quite a big space across all of these, right?
Mm.
But they're all important. That's why it's like we can't just take the one and right not address the others. We have to address all the planes on which we are wounded. It's funny, it's almost my personal work. It's about do you know all the parts in the place? When I was just saying before with the flashlight example, do we really know all the places and parts where we're kind of wounded and stuck? It's like kind of having to get to look in there first and get the lay of the land and
Mm-hmm.
then do the work and then go back into like, okay, now let me look at this map again. And also,
Mm.
what do I know now that I didn't know before? So it's funny to think of like how we have to kind of do a little integrating reclamation first and do journey work. And then that is the path of healing. It's not like,
Mm.
oh, I want to heal. Let me jump on. It's like, well, we got to look at what do we have here first? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you know where you're going
Hmm.
or what you're looking at. And so would you say that people come back again then to like do another layer or look at a different piece?
Yes. But, I get asked this question a lot. It's not a lot of people that return. I imagine some of that is just purely logistics. And also, our data might not be great because we had COVID, right? And we
Mhm.
had to hit
Mhm.
pause and we couldn't see clients. But yeah, we do have a handful. And sometimes, because the expansion retreat, the 5-day expansion retreat we offer is a co ed space. So before COVID, we were leading a women's retreat. I was leading a women's retreat with one of our facilitators. And so you would have sometimes women that were in the co-ed that came to women, or women that came to the women's retreat and then went to the co-ed. That happened. And I know some folks, they might go elsewhere. A lot of our clients are from the US. And so traveling to Europe is no small thing. So I think sometimes it's just logistics and costs and things. It might be a lot for people, that are working and busy schedules. But people definitely, and in my own practice, work with psychedelics at the speed they need to over time. So it just depends. This goes back to like, you're really the one that needs to dictate. I have some clients and I know facilitators that might work multiple sessions. It also depends on the medicine, what the tolerance is and the load is on the body, right? Some
Mhm.
things you can't take over and over, and it's not right to do. So there's a lot of, this is where you need to work with, educated professionals that work in that kind of guide, like the path. So you might say, I'm ready. And some people it might be years before they're ready again.
Yeah. Yeah, cuz I think I know for some people it's like that kind of glow lasts a long time.
Hmm.
And like you said, for others it's like getting back and then suddenly it's not there and they might want to go back to taking the psychedelic to repeat that. But like you said, there's some other work to be done.
Hmm.
Are there like professionals that you connect folks with back where they are to keep talking it through after the experience? Or is that something they do on their own?
We have to be careful, right? Because we're not giving medical advice, or, there's those boundaries there. And so
Sure.
we have to really know someone and have them vetted to refer. We do have people that we trust deeply, but can you imagine if you're working with an organization that doesn't really vet the danger, a harm that could be produced
Hmm.
and by referring someone, you don't know their skill set. That's why in the application preparation process, we're really looking for who is your network and community and helping you to make sure that is established. So it's more of like a harm reduction approach.
Hmm.
How are you setting this up for you? And we can help with that. also, like I mentioned, fireside and many kind of like your Zendos and harm reduction folks that are out there broadly in the space that are wonderful at what they do, connecting you with those resources as well. And then certainly we're always available. If somebody needed some support as a short term interim, so we wouldn't want to leave somebody without some support. But that's not really our it hasn't been a deep offering we've had. It's something we want to do is like more ongoing community, staying in that group
Hmm.
model.
I
But
was
to your good
wondering,
point,
yeah.
yeah, Laura, it's like sometimes you need like a therapist, you need somebody one to one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's different needs. I mean, I could imagine that cohorts might wanna, like, see each other again a year later or something, and that's a different from
Yeah. I
yeah.
think people keep in touch, but it's not often that you really see a whole group that was there together come back together, things like
Mm.
that.
It's very interesting. I'm thinking about the groups and some of the things you said about some of the reasons that, people might not be able to return, the financial and the travel and things like that. And I was wondering when I was just thinking about speaking with you, just and about the kind of trendiness right now that's happening around psychedelics, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I was just wondering about the demographics that you're seeing as far as like, is this kind of a white privileged endeavor that something about it feels that way to me, but maybe I'm getting it wrong. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing and if synthesis is trying to do anything to maybe reach different people.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing this up. Overall, at synthesis at the moment, and I think a lot of the space, like what you referred to, it is a very white space. And yes, we care deeply, and I'll talk in a moment about what we're up to in this way. And I want to say, these plants and this doesn't belong to us, and it belongs to all of us. And that's kind of wisdom that I've received from my own elders. That she kind of talks about like fire. Can you imagine if one of us said, I own fire? And so what we've seen or what my life experience, these things that kind of take off when they first launch, you tend to see kind of the wealthier. I think there's also not just a whiteness, but an economic piece here, financial class. And these have been, expensive. And if you don't live in an area or have access to a local practitioner, you're flying somewhere, you're spending a lot of money to go somewhere and do these things. What we've done over our few years here is simply made space for those that indicate to us need. We've got some scholarship, BIPOC and LGBTQ plus kind of innovators in the field, people that are leading the way or doing this work and or economic need. We've long been making sure that we had space in a retreat and not with perfection, but we've had a pretty significant handful of folks that we come through and we either completely comp the spot. So there's no fee or partial. It depends on need. And so we've kind of done that, the best of our ability is we're a startup ourselves. And there's a reality of we won't be here if we don't perform to a certain degree. So it's always tough to balance business with this kind of beautiful transformative work. But last year, and where we're going to more deeply address this and really truly address this is we're very culturally diverse, right? We're a team, an international team that represent many, many countries and backgrounds and ways of working with medicine. There's that diversity, but in terms of like programming that is for those that would identify with BIPOC and some of these other populations, our governance model is something we call stewardship, and it's about stewarding, not owning. And within that is ethic of collaboration. And so, really stringing together being stewards that are dedicated to collaboration and looking at this dominance of white wealth, kind of piece we're pointing at is how can we show up in partnership and create space for collaboration to build programming that doesn't exist in our organization anyway. I'm well aware, there's others that may be doing this. But how do we kind of bring that into the mainstream? Because, yeah, there's some populations, just like complex trauma folks, we need our own container, right? And so that's going to be a delicate body of work. And how do we, find partnership? And no one knows how. And then being a pioneer, you're so far out in front, you don't know how. And so right now, it's about really building sincere relationship and it's about listening I've talked to collaborators that identify in the BIPOC space and they say like they don't want a white partner. They're not interested, with love. It's like they don't, that thing of like, we figured it out and like, hey, can you come and insert your safe? Like the tokenism, things of that nature.
Hmm.
I really feel like we're in a moment of we need to listen more than lead on this. And we need to develop relationships with those that we can be in right partnership with. And we have a lot to learn about how do we do this in a way that's deeply honoring what is needed and the wounds that have been created. And yeah, it's a really deep, sensitive question. And so I look forward to our year ahead. We're wanting to pilot BIPOC retreat here at our new Oregon location in 2023. And so that's something we're really looking forward to, diversifying away from this kind of wellness model and how do we open up the space. And we weren't able to do that so much in the Netherlands because
Hmm.
of the nature of the truffle. You can't offer anything that looks like therapy or treatment. And so we have to be very careful. Whereas in Oregon, under Measure 109, it's a non-medical model, right? So a lot of these things that might show up in these populations, we don't have those restrictions anymore. So yeah, this year ahead is going to be one looking at BIPOC programming, and trauma, PTSD.
Mm.
And then
Wow.
hopefully down the road as we get to go is end of life care. We're also very passionate about. So
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah, I know a lot of people that are focusing on end of life care now. This role of the death doula is coming up more and more. It's really lovely that some attention is being given to that space.
yeah, and many are.
But I think there is also a lot of it's something many of us hide from, right? Because of our own fears. So sometimes easier to look away.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. I mean, as we've been navigating Jedi work, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, we see our edges. And that's the thing about working with our edges. And in order to transform them, we have to meet them. And that's a lot. It's a lot of edges. So we've got a lot of work to do as a culture, as a community, as an organization to walk the talk we so desperately want to be a stand for. I think anyone doing this work, I think there's a humility you really have to come with. Like, we do not have the answers, but we're learning.
Yeah, and we're really excited that you are. So, are you here yet in the US or this is about to unfold?
There's two tracks for us. One, we do a psychedelic practitioner training program. And so that training program just got licensed by the state of Oregon. And what that means is Oregon rolls out, they have a residency requirement. So at this moment, for I think it's 2 more years, you have to have lived here for 2 years. And then you can go to a licensed psychedelic facilitator training program. And we got licensed. A handful of training programs got licensed. So that's amazing. And we just finished forming the first Oregon cohort. And so they'll go through our training and then they go sit for state licensure. So that's the training path. And then the other amazing news is that in 2020, Measure 109 was passed by the state of Oregon, but they built in something called an opt out. So each county was able to vote if they wanted it in their county, even though the state vote won. And last week, there was a very important vote for us. Our county, where we acquired our venue, put the opt out on the ballot. So people in our county had another time to vote and say, we do or do not want this here in our county. And so excited to share that we won. The county said, yes, we do want this year. There's actually a couple points more in the way of support than it was in 2020. And so we're literally just processing the news that our venue here is going to be one of the first psilocybin service centers in Oregon and in the US. So that's where we're at. So our goal is to do, I think, what it's a soft opening in 2023.
Wow. Congratulations. That is very exciting news.
It is very exciting. Yeah,
Maybe a little bit closer now. Maybe I know my husband wants to visit, so and
yeah,
maybe me as well. Yeah, that's very exciting. I think we'll be very happy, and there'll be many people very happy to have you here, much closer by,
yeah.
continuing with your work and your research, and specifically. those cohort that you talked about hosting here in the US, I think are very much needed and very important. And of course, I'll be interested in following the trauma work, especially. Maybe I can come and bring some trauma sensitive yoga.
Yes, we'll have to talk offline. We're always keen to invite folks in the space. And as I just said, collaboration is so important, right? There aren't enough of us, right? There couldn't be enough of us for a long time to come, unfortunately. And so the more that we can all work together and build networks just to support folks wherever they're at in the process, it's always an open door. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's great to hear that. What else do you have coming up, or what else have I neglected to ask you about your work that you think is important to share with folks today?
When I imagine talking with people, we're sitting in a circle and it's really the trauma healing. It's a sensitive body of work. And even for those that, might identify as that like healthy, normal, non diagnosed, maybe wanting to do this work for creative breakthrough and these things, that's beautiful and that has its place. But for those that are really processing healing trauma, it's really what I was saying earlier. Your safety is so important. And really making sure if you're going to step into this work that you take your time, really research an organization, ask to talk to people. It's okay to ask for a referral to people that would be open to talking to you, making sure any body of work you go into has a health screening and safety planning process available to you, making sure there's a lot of support ahead of your journey and post journey. I think just really making sure people hear that, Laura. There's just times I've heard the horror stories of, people heard some great news and then they went to
Mm.
Peru or they went to Mexico and you get a phone call afterwards that they might be hospitalized or and a lot of times it's because there wasn't screening or there wasn't clarity around a contraindication with a medication, or they're not given really good advice, or they take far too much. Not
Mm.
everybody needs to take a whole lot of drugs and go pierce the veils of consciousness straight away. Maybe we ease into that water slow. Anyone listening that's going, hey, I want to try this out, go slow, be safe, trust your intuition and your gut. You have to kind of just define, is it something the group is great for you or you need something much smaller container? Making sure that you're working with practitioners, that you're not ever one to one. I can't say that enough. It can go very well, but I would never set myself up or a client up to be one on one with a facilitator, to make sure you have two
Mhm.
people there. There's a lot of just kind of that PSA piece around this because of the nature of who we're talking to in your podcast. That matters to everybody, not just to us that are healing and trauma, but really especially when you're new in your healing journey and things. Like I said, there's a lot of people. Have they gone? What's their journey like? Do they have trauma? What kinds of trauma? Are they forthcoming with you? Where are they in their journey? And so there's just as you can really feel how you need a lot of spaciousness, safety, slow. And that's the thing, because when we're in pain, we want an answer yesterday. So you have to really watch that. That way we can get really frenetic. I'm like, I gotta do it, I gotta like, and especially when you're feeling ideation, suicide ideations and things. There's a lot of how do you vet? How do you take the time to really prepare? It's just not something you can say, I want to do it, and then tomorrow go do it. That's not safe. It's not smart. So just really saying, take care of yourself, go slow, get informed. That container you start with when we talk about set and setting and psychedelics, we're talking the mindset and the setting. That first step in, you're already creating the container, your mindset and the setting. So take good care and reach out to organizations like ours or others. Ask questions. So I just think go slow, be safe. There's a lot of people out there that weren't there before, that weren't so visible anyway, because the legal structures are changing. So yeah, I think that's what I would leave us with.
Yeah, I was going to say that the more this is going to be legalized, there's going to be a lot of options out there. And so, just like with anything, you really want to do your research, really think about who you're putting your psyche in the hands of, or who's going to be guiding that experience is going to be so important.
Mhm.
It's like, I bring it back to yoga, there's so many different types. There are then all the different teachers of that one type. And so you really want to take your time finding that match. because one style or one facilitator might, they might be for someone else, but they might not be for you. So finding that right match is doing that legwork is really, really important
Yes,
before jumping in.
exactly.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of questions and a lot of interest in this conversation and this topic. So maybe we'll revisit as those questions come up or once you're up and going in Oregon. And we'll see what people are, what you're finding out about the trauma research as you head more into that and where more of the curiosities are bubbling up.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the work you're doing and creating spaces just to have the conversation. I think we're still in a place where a lot of trauma and wounds are thriving in silence. Just the speaking about it, as many of us know, is one of the most powerful first steps. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to answering any follow up questions or anything I can do to be a support to you and your community. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we buzz around the busy world, it becomes clear there are billions of paths. As we buzz around the busy world, we will appear in other people's photographs. As we speed through the centuries, we will collide and the light will bend. We will be accidentally immortalized in someone else's land.